Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love these watches, everything you see here is for sale. We're starting our weekend off right. Reach out to me at tmosso@thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Also accessories, condition, extra photos. I can supply it all. We are always looking to build inventory as we enter the summer. Please reach out to me if you have a watch you want to trade or sell. We pay cash, we pay fast. We will buy your whole collection, and we pay instantly. No upper limit on value paid. We will buy your entire collection of Richard Mille tourbillons. So reach out to tmosso@thewatchbox.com to buy, trade, or sell. Let's jump straight into the watch I promised. Thumbnail clickbait, you better believe it, but worth the wait. Launched last year, this is the Palm Dial Rolex Oyster Perpetual Datejust. So the watch you see here is a combination of 904L steel and Rolex Everose red gold. Rolex makes its own cases, its own clasps, its own bracelets. You can see here we have the Jubilee 5-link dress bracelet. It's a good-looking bracelet, and with all solid links, modern Jubilees are sports bracelets. They're no longer delicate, they don't wear, they don't stretch, and they vent the wrist better than the Oyster. So if you're looking for a sports watch for spring and summer, this is actually a very reasonable choice. First, it's 100 meters water resistant. Second, it's both shock and anti-magnetic. Shock resistant thanks to the movement architecture, anti-magnetic thanks to the hairspring. It is well lumed, and as you can see, it has an abundance of Rolex's proprietary Chromalight blue lume. Now the watch wears easily on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. We'll zoom out a little bit, get a better perspective, and you can appreciate that the watch is traditionally sized. This is the 36 millimeter Datejust, as the model was originally launched in its first iteration back in 1945. That was the 40th anniversary or Jubilee of Rolex, which is why the bracelet launched with the watch was known as the Jubilee. The watch was called the Datejust because of its jumping date. It would jump immediately at midnight, so the date, as displayed, was always just. Anti-magnetic, water-resistant, shock-resistant, chronometer certified, and it has a 70-hour automatic winding power reserve. Now we go from one side of Geneva to the other, and they're not actually that far apart. I've walked from Rolex to FP Journe and back. Francois-Paul Journe is an idiosyncratic guy, but there is no denying that he is the most influential independent watchmaker of modern times. What you see here is an early example of his work, 38 millimeters in platinum with yellow gold dial. This is the FP Journe Octa Lune. You can see that it features a brass caliber. Now these older Journe watches made from 99 to mid-2004 feature brass movements, and they also feature cases made in France by Eleanor, his original case supplier, which is why you see the Eleanor maker's mark and then the French hallmarks on the case in addition to the Swiss, so it has the hallmarks of both. The watch has a 120-hour automatic winding power reserve and a moon phase and a double-digit date that are both set by Quickset. The watch is about 44.5 millimeters from lug to lug, and being the discontinued 38 millimeter case size, it wears easily on any wrist. You can see it would easily slide underneath my cuff, absolutely no difficulty there. Brass caliber, 38 millimeter, discontinued models, French-made Eleanor cases. All of these things are appealing to Journe collectors. And this watch, though not old objectively, you could see the case itself was made in 2003. This generation of Journe watch is known as a vintage piece by the standards of this brand, and thus very collectible. Now, if you want to talk about something else from the early days of the Journe brand, right here we have a watch that represents FP Journe's first chronograph built under his own name. So this is the Octa Chronograph, and this is the ruthenium version of it, the ruthenium series. 99 or 100 pieces each, depending on who you ask, but they were built in 40 millimeter platinum cases, and they all featured, over the 5 models that received the ruthenium treatment, ruthenium-coated dials, and they are brass caliber FP Journe watches, but instead of rhodium on the brass, here we have this lovely nickel anthracite ruthenium on the movement as well. You can see this too is a French hallmarked Eleanor case, and we have that brass movement. You can also see that there's a more subtle contrast between the rotor itself here and the brass bridges when they are darkened. The watch beats away at 21.6. It's 5-position adjusted like a chronometer, It has the 120-hour power reserve. It also has a feature that's often overlooked. It is a flyback chronograph, so you reset and restart with one trigger. It doesn't need to be stopped first. There's a quick set for the double-digit date, and as a holistic design, you can see we have a ruthenium-coated set of discs for the date. We have a minutes register for the chronograph that's 60 minutes, and I actually adore that because it's much more practical than 30. Now, only about 310 or so of the Octa chronographs were made. These were labeled 1 through 99, but depending on who you ask, there may or may not have been a serial number 0 in each series, which means these were either 99 or 100-piece limited editions within the ruthenium series. So you take the already rare Octa chronograph, and then you get the even scarcer ruthenium treatment, and you have a watch that is in a class by itself as both a timepiece and as an investment. Now, taking a quick look at something that's very different, a little bit more contemporary, we have the 40mm rose gold Octa Automatique Lune. Now, it is a lovely watch with a silver white dial that features blue printing for a splash of color. We have the traditional double-digit date with a quick set. We have a quick set for the moon phase as well, which you can see is a little bit more photorealistic now compared to the previous generations of Octa Lune. You can see that's a little bit more classical, what you'd expect on maybe a pocket watch moon phase, whereas here we literally have the surface of the moon. 120-hour chronometric power reserve, but these are actually rated to 160. They will run for 160 hours, but 120 is the period during which they run most precisely. Now, we're into the era of rose gold movements, and you can see that we have a rose gold movement inside a rose gold case, so the weight is significant. The finishing has also gotten better over the years on Journe watches. It's still a combination of manual and mechanical finish, but it looks better, neater, cleaner, more consistent, and more artisanal than it looked in the past. The timepiece is easy to wear. All of these are. None of them are objectively big watches. This timepiece, 40 millimeters in diameter, larger than the 38 from before, but still a timepiece that wears flat flush. It is thin. It's very comfortable, and it's quite a looker. If you like a little bit more color on your watch, this is a good way to go. That said, I like practical complications. Moon phases are romantic, but calendars, I use calendars every day. I'm always looking at the date on my watch, and when I don't have a watch with a date, I miss it. Here's the discontinued FP Journe Journe Calendrier, and as you can see, this is a lovely 38 millimeter case size. But this one has a white gold dial. So in platinum, it includes a dial that is made of solid white gold, and when we turn it over, we have a movement made of rose gold. So this is a triple precious metal watch. You can see still with the Eleanor case, the watch has a rose gold movement, a platinum case, and a white gold dial. So the weight is significant. We have an annual calendar that need be adjusted only once during the jump from February to March, and there's a quick set for setting it. We have a retrograde date that runs around the windows for the day and the month, and of course, once again, we have that 120-hour power reserve, courtesy of caliber 1300, the Octa caliber. The watch wears easy, it wears comfortable, it's a good-looking piece, and fashionable. The watch is discontinued and has been for several years, as both the Calendrier and the 38 millimeter have passed into history. Both are quite collectible individually, but in combination, all the more so. A good-looking watch, and again, you have several options in this episode from FP Journe. But let's say you want something that is just as handsome, even more compact, also hails from Geneva, and gives you a combination of the practicality of a calendar with the romance of a moon phase. Well, why choose? You get it all with this Patek Philippe 5136 1J. So the watch is yellow gold, 37 millimeters. It has a lovely and fluid polished case. You can see that Patek thought of everything. There are little apertures inside the end links of the bracelet, so you can still adjust the calendar even with the bracelet fit. It is a lovely 5-link design that, like the Jubilee before, has enough gaps to vent well. And although today Patek bracelets are fixed with pin sleeves. Well, removable links today are fixed with pin sleeves on modern Patek bracelets. Back when this was made in the early to mid-2000s, the removable links were fixed by screws, and they were white gold screws to better resist deformation. This is a model that was launched in 2003, the very tail end of the use of Sigma dials on Patek watches, and then it was made through about 2008. So these are scarce, and it wears nicely. It's very comfortable. It's super compact, and you can see if I move further away from the camera, it really does shrink right down relative to the size of my whole arm, my hand, my My forearm makes this watch look nice and compact and discreet. In spite of the fact that it is yellow gold, and that is a very harsh and visible type of gold, the fact that it's not too big gives it a little bit of a vintage air and some discretion when you're wearing it. It has a movement based on caliber 240, so 48-hour power reserve, micro rotor automatic that gives you the big open caseback vista of a manual and the thin profile of a manual, but with the convenience of an automatic. We have a gyromax style free sprung balance, adjusted in 5 positions. It beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. You can see that there are a number of traditional finishing elements, including this mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges, engine turning in 2 sizes on the base plate. You'll note the locating pins on the balance cock that are actually used to secure that bridge onto the plate. Those pins have been black polished on their top. We have satination on the wheels. We have Cote de Genève on the bridges as well as the rotor, and then we have screw heads that are chamfered about their slots and circumference and black polished on their heads. And it is a perpetual calendar, so it can keep up with leap years, irregular length months. You don't have to touch it, provided you keep it running. You don't have to touch it until the year 2100. The Sigma dial, what is that? Well, during the 70s, a Swiss Precious Metals Trade Association wanted watchmakers to advertise the use of real gold on their dials. So when you see this little Sigma-like symbol, that means the hands and the indices are gold. And if you ever see Sigma with an M, that means hands and indices plus the dial are solid gold. Speaking of solid gold, an unexpected launch from 2021. Now this is, and I'll grab my little vintage style watch you want polishing cloth. This is the Tudor Black Bay 58 18 karat, 18 carats of yellow gold. It is the Black Bay 58 that we first saw back in 2018, closer in size and proportion to the historic Rolex and Tudor no crown guard Submariners of the 1950s. This is a watch that is more true to the vintage evocative concept of the Tudor Black Bay line than the larger 41 and 43 millimeter versions. You can see it is a 39. It is fairly thin. It's just over 12 millimeters thick, so it's fairly competitive with Rolex watches, which had previously distinguished themselves from Tudor watches by their thinner profile. This is quite competitive. The movement goes from about 6.5 millimeters thick to 4.99, and that's expressed also in the thickness of the case, which is considerably less here. The case is 18 karat yellow gold with a lovely military-style olive green bezel insert and dial. We'll do a quick lume shot here. You can see, well, the case is inspired by the no-guard Tudor subs. The hands are actually inspired by the snowflakes of the late 60s through early 70s. So we actually have 2 different eras of Tudor subs that live on in this watch. Now, the watch includes a wonderful micro-knurling outboard that makes it a real pleasure to operate. You can hear just how sharp the detent is. And then, this was a little bit controversial last year, but for the first time, Tudor gives us display casebacks on the Black Bay. I'm not sure this is necessary. The movement is as technically impressive as it is homely, and I'm not going to lie, I don't think we need to see it, but you can't argue with the specs. Tudor went out and designed a special movement that was thinner and of smaller diameter specifically for these models, the Black Bay 58s, and they have the same tech specs as the larger MT 5600 series in the bigger Black Bays and the Pelagos, so 70-hour power reserve, chronometer certification, stop seconds, full balance bridge with a free sprung index, and anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. It has all of those features, and this watch is 200 meters water resistant, so this is a true everyday driver. If you want to take it swimming, just put it on a water-resistant strap and take note. Attention to detail. You get a matching 18-karat yellow gold buckle, and it is a good look. It is a vintage look, and with the combination of the matte green, it is a classic look. Now, that's classic. This is avant-garde. Originally launched back in 2013, the Ressence Type 3 evolved in 2015 via the addition of a thermometer on its dials. This is the Type 3, and it is a difficult watch to explain if you've never seen one of these before, but I'll start. First, Ressence is a Belgian company. They design in Antwerp, Belgium. They build in Switzerland. Benoit Mintiens is the founder. He is an industrial designer. He wanted to create a watch that was easy to use, friendly, approachable, unpretentious, and distinctive, and he achieved all of those. The Type 3 features a sliver slim grade 5 titanium case, but you can see almost all of it is actually the cambered sapphire on the back and the cambered sapphire on the top. Now, the watch is 44 millimeters in diameter, but it is feather light, in spite of the fact that it is filled with 37.5 milliliters of oil. So that is how you're able to read it from every angle. The top module, which is all Ressence manufactured watchmaking, is submerged in oil, sealed for life, self-lubricating, and requires no maintenance. It is a system built on a planetary display. You can see how it is a regulator, as we have separate displays of hours, minutes, and seconds. Though take note, the seconds are unconventional. This is actually a 90-second runner. It's just there to let you know the watch is operating. Now, we also have a day indicator, and if you look outboard, we also have a date indicator. So the watch is a regulator as well as a day date. The dial is filled with oil, and it has the same index of refraction as the sapphire, so you can read it perfectly from any angle. We have a day indicator that is comprised of several arcs, 7 of them, and it moves in a clockwise direction. So, for example, because those little shaded arcs are the weekend and it moves in a clockwise direction, we can see Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then here we are. I'll show you how this works. We are in the early hours of Wednesday morning, because that little hand is at the beginning of the arc. And then you can see that it is 5 a.m. because the hand is in the beginning of the arc of the day. So now you're looking at 5 in the morning, not in the evening. Now there's a little temperature display. It's a thermometer. You can see you can get too cold, you can get too hot, but my understanding is that it's not really possible for either of these extremes to be reached on the wrist, as the wrist will cool the watch in extreme hot and warm it in extreme cold. Now, of course, all of this is isolated from the base movement, which is an automatic winding ETA 2824. So it's a very reliable, simple service when it goes in. It's an automatic winder with a 4 hertz beat rate and a 36-hour power reserve. The Ressence module is all proprietary and includes a number of cool innovations, including a magnetic coupling. So there's no actual shaft or drive that passes from the oil-filled chamber down to the base movement. There's no mechanical link between them. There are also several bellows to allow for expansion and contraction of the oil, so you're not going to burst your bubble as you're wearing this watch on a hot or a cold day. Now, I should show you a lume shot because it is otherworldly, truly. Encounters of the third kind. Close encounters, that is. The watch is absolutely brilliant, giving you more and better lume than almost anything else in existence. The entirety of the dial is lumed, right down to the little Ressence hand logo at the top of the hour display. A very cool watch, and an easy one to wear on a small wrist. In spite of its size, don't think of it as 44 millimeters. If you can wear a 40 millimeter round watch, you can wear this one. It's not overpowering. The lugs are barely there. They just sort of drape the watch over the wrist. It's a lot like a wire lug Panerai Rodimir, and you can see it's actually sloped enough. It's not thin, but it's sloped on its side, so it could slide underneath a lot of cuffs. Though probably not as well as this can slide under a lot of cuffs. Here we have the Patek Philippe Nautilus Moonphase, 5712 1A001. In a lot of ways, this is the connoisseur's piece, as the 5711 has accelerated towards insanity on secondary markets. These have picked up, but not to the extent of the basic 3-hand date. Now, the watch has a more upscale movement than the 5711, as it uses a micro rotor automatic rather than the central rotor. The watch is 40 millimeters in diameter, and compared to something like the 5726 annual calendar or the 5990 and 5980 chronographs, this feels like a 5711 on the wrist, whereas those other ones almost feel like an offshore to the Royal Oak. This does feel like a 5711. It's only 8.5 millimeters thick. It is well lumed. The hands and the indices are white gold, and it's quite practical, but this watch is all about complications, and it's got a couple of them. You can see a 4-dot dial. It's got a 48-hour automatic winding power reserve. The indicator's up at 10 o'clock. Coaxial moon phase and radial date in small seconds. When you turn it over, you can see that this is the caliber 240 micro rotor. We saw it before, and I'm going to demonstrate this, I guess. Not a whole lot changes here. What I can tell you is that this example is considerably newer than we saw in the 5136, so it includes 6 position adjustment rather than 5, and it includes an anti-magnetic silicon hairspring rather than a ferrous hairspring. With the silicon hairspring, 6 position adjustment, and the Patek Philippe seal, that means this watch is attested to run no worse than -3 + 2 seconds per 24 hours from the factory. Throw it on the wrist, it is very comfortable. The bracelet is a wonder. Silky, smooth, ergonomically outstanding. The watch is only 46 millimeters from link to link across the wrist, so you could absolutely wear this as a man or a woman. I think a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference will wear it well. Remember, my wrist is 16. You'll need a slightly larger wrist, however, to wear this, but this is my favorite version of a watch that launched back in 2017, and while I've seen many Zenith Defy El Primero 21s that include the open dials, I've rarely ever seen this, the Panda dial model with solid dial, 44 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. This is the Defy El Primero 21 that I would buy for myself. Now you know about the 1/100th of a second foudroyant. There are two separate movements inside the case, and you can see bouncing away. I'll do my best to show you this. There are two separate escapements. One operates at 360,000 vibrations per hour, and the other one is an El Primero escapement. That one has a silicon escapement. That is 36,000 vibrations per hour, which means, among other things, you can stop the watch through hacking, and you can see constant seconds as stopped, but the chronograph continues to operate. The other thing is you can shut down the chronograph, even leave it unwound, and the watch will continue to tell time. So two barrels, two drivetrains, two escapements, two balances, really two independent movements in one case. Each one is able to operate without the other one. Now here's the thing though, you have to manually wind the chronograph. It has a 50-minute power reserve because it is very power intensive. So you wind that by turning the crown clockwise. When you wind counterclockwise, you wind the El Primero timekeeping functions, but keep in mind that also has a rotor. It can wind itself. The chronograph cannot. Now the watch has plenty of lume. We'll take a look at it right here. And it is 100 meters water resistant. Keep in mind that it has two different power reserve spans, 50 minutes for the chronograph, 50 hours for the time telling functions, and the time telling functions have been certified with the COSC. This watch is a COSC certified Swiss chronometer. It has a set of straps. They're quite attractive and comfortable. The strap is a fusion, Hublot style, of rubber and leather, and that's probably where they drew the inspiration for that strap. But before you write off the case shape and size as Hublot inspired, keep in mind that Zenith actually made Defy sports watches in the late 60s and early 70s in this shape. So this is very much a Zenith case shape, although it does borrow some Tag Heuer engineering to run the 100th of a second foudroyant. A note about that. The point here is that you can easily read hundredths of a second. So right there, I stopped it at half a second or 5/100ths of a second. Now, if it were one more, it would be 6/100ths or 7/100ths of a second. So it allows you to read to an incredible resolution by taking that 1 second and just spreading it. And you can see that's not half a second. I said half a second. It's not half a second. It is 1/20th of a second. So right there, 5% of a second, and that goes all the way around the dial. So this is a 1/100th of a second foudroyant, exactly like you'll find on the FP Journe Constantin, but the Constantin has a tiny scale. This one has a large one. It's easier to read. This one's more durable, and it costs a lot less money. Again, it is 100 meters water resistant, full deployment clasp. This watch is loaded with useful features. Let's say you want the original oversized sports watch. Well, released in 2020 in this, its latest edition, we have the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Chronograph 43. Now, there's a lot of changes here, big changes internally with a new movement, caliber 4401, introduced on the Code 1159 chrono back in 2019. A few features that I should shout out. One, the beat rate goes up from the old offshore chronograph from 21.6 to 28.8, which makes for a potentially more accurate watch and more shock tolerant. The watch also goes from a modular chronograph architecture to an integrated one, which is why the date is now flush with the dial and the watch is a little bit thinner. Power reserve goes from 60 hours to 70 hours, and you can see we have now a visible black polished column wheel and one of the few visible vertical clutch mechanisms I've ever encountered. So you have the column wheel for crispness, and then you have the vertical clutch for smooth engagement. Now you have another feature too that wasn't previously available, which is a flyback chronograph. So you can fly back and restart just by pushing the reset trigger. Bezel and scratch resistant ceramic, same for the crown, shoulder, and the chronograph pushers. Note that shoulder and pushers have been alternately faceted and polished. Attention to detail is strong. Take a look at the end of the bezel and take a look at the middle of the bezel. The bezel actually tapers from end to end, thinning out at the ends and thickening in its center. The crystal is actually cambered, and you can see it has an unusual curvature to it, somewhat like the Code 1159 crystal. The registers are beautiful and symmetrical. Remember, the offshore chronograph used to be a 12, 9, and 6. Well, we have a conventional chronograph with a bilateral symmetrical display right now. Blue on gray. You can see that the Mega tapisserie has changed. We now have cross-hatching between the large hobnails, and I'm not sure how well you can see this, but there's vertical striation or texturing on the top of each hobnail. The watch is still 100 meters, water resistant. It has hacking seconds, a quick set date, a diver-style strap, and a new feature, a push-button quick release for the strap. So this is easier to do if you use two fingers at once. Just like that. Pulls out. Now you can replace it with anything you want. There will be many options from Audemars Piguet, including, for example, leather, textile, and I'm sure due to the popularity of Royal Oak aftermarket straps that we will see the aftermarket begin to dabble in options for this watch. So lots to love here, all new, and as you can see, quite well lumed. A true sports watch, 100 meters water resistant. Once again, it's equipped with a buckle that is as smart as the lug release system. As you can see, it too is designed to be removed. There's that little arrow, you pivot it, it releases. So you can remove the strap from the case and the buckle from the strap and do a double switch without any tools whatsoever. Now, we talked about Rolex early on, but that was a modern watch released in just the last year. This is an S-Series, circa 1993, Rolex Oyster Perpetual Cosmograph Daytona 16520, Zenith El Primero. And the nice thing about this tritium dial, whereas many original tritium dials remain intact, albeit with service replacement Luminova hands, you could see this one is dead as a doornail. There's a brief glimmer from the indices, and they fade quickly. This is the real deal. The whole dial is matched patina, not fauxtina. A lovely black on white, highly prized color combo. It's 40 millimeters in diameter. It is El Primero based, but it's important to recognize that Rolex Caliber 4030 is not just a Zenith El Primero. Rolex dictated many engineering changes, and Zenith had a special room in Le Loc where it built these movements for the Rolex Daytona from 1988 to 1999. Now, the watch is the same size and really the same appearance as a modern Daytona, so the 1988 redesign was the seminal one. It set the design conventions for the watch that endure to this day. So metal tachymeter scale, screw-down crowns, 100 meters water-resistant, automatic winding, sapphire crystal, a 40-millimeter case diameter. All of that was part of the 1988 redesign. So here's what changes compared to a standard El Primero movement when it becomes Rolex Caliber 4030. First, the date's removed. Second, the beat rate is changed from 5 hertz to 4 hertz, not because it's strictly necessary for durability, but because Rolex, being overly cautious, wanted more than just reliability. It wanted ultimate reliability, as well as the ability to use conventional lubricants when servicing the watch anywhere in the world. It also made changes to the winding system, which is quite fiddly and contains a lot of springs on the Zenith El Primero winding system. Rolex's perpetual winding system is simpler, stronger, and more efficient. Now, another big change, a 5-position adjustment and a chronometer certification, something not commonly seen on El Primeros. Also, a change in the architecture of the balance structures. We now have a free-sprung balance with Rolex's micro-stella adjustment nuts on the balance wheel, replacing the mobile stud index of the original El Primero for regulation purposes. It's also a more durable, better braced setup. And of course, Rolex replaced the flat hairspring with a handmade Breguet overcoil to help it keep better time in every position. Now, what doesn't change, the El Primero's 50-hour power reserve remains, as does the combination of a column wheel function selector and a lateral clutch. And again, all this is 100 meters water resistant. It's still durable enough as a watch that though it is vintage now and almost 30 years old, it can still be worn every day as a practical modern timepiece. It's not delicate the way an old caliber 722 or 727 manual wind Daytona would be. So this is still a very wearable collectible. That said, some folks do want a smaller Rolex, and this is one we don't often speak of, but it's a 37mm mid-size Yacht-Master. So throwing this one on my wrist, you get a good sense of how it fits. Remember, a Datejust in 36 looks just fine on a man's wrist, and this here is a nice, discreet watch. It is on the smaller side, and I'm going to say it's more likely to be a match for a lady than a man, but make no mistake, if you have a small wrist, this is going to be a good match. I would wear this quite happily, and as you can see, there's no problem cuffing it. The bezel is platinum, the dial is dark rhodium plated, and the case and bracelet are 904L stainless steel. Still has 100 meters of water resistance, still has the bidirectional rotating yacht timing bezel, which you can use to time the start of a match, which is a race within a regatta. Now, this dark rhodium dial actually debuted at Baselworld 2016, and in my opinion, with the cyan accents, it might be the most attractive standard dial Rolex makes. There is plenty of lume, and as you can see, it is Rolex's Chromalight blue lume. What's interesting about this watch is that unlike the full-size Yacht-Master, this 55-hour power reserve automatic uses Rolex's Siloxy anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. This is a feature that's still very rare on Rolex watches, but make no mistake, it is present and correct here. You also get all of the upscale features, including the Easylink quick adjustment mechanism inside of the clasp. So it is a smaller Yacht-Master. It is not a less capable Yacht-Master. Let's say you want to go high horology, but let's say you want to stick with full bracelet chronographs and sports watch style. Well, combine what you just saw with the Daytona, and you've got something approximating what you see right here. Geneva-made 42mm in stainless steel Vacheron Constantin Overseas Chronograph Generation 2. You've got the Amerigo Vespucci on the back, 150-meter water-resistant screw-down crown and pushers, 25,000 ampere per meter anti-magnetism, and a 40-hour automatic winding vertical clutch column wheel Frederic Piguet high horology chronograph caliber inside. The watch looks good, it feels good, and as you can see, the bracelet, courtesy of angled lugs, arcs right around the wrist. So even if your wrist is 14 centimeters in circumference, you're going to find this wears well. Now, one feature that did not continue into the third generation watch is the flexibility of the bracelet. You see how I can pull it straight down out of the lugs? Well, on the third generation watch, the current generation, this wants to flare. It wants to flare and fight you. So this is a 42 that wears like a 42, or maybe even a 41. It is a very comfortable watch, even on a smallish wrist, and you can see it is well loomed. It's a real sports watch. Your standard Royal Oak chrono is 50 meters water resistant. I cannot overemphasize this is 150. There's a lovely sort of herringbone cross hatching, and often overlooked is the big eye style chronograph display. So if you've seen the Longines Big Eye among others, you know that a bigger minutes register is practical because the minutes are much more important than, for example, chronograph hours. So more space is devoted to the minutes, and you can see that more easily. The case is quite thin, being just 12.5 millimeters thick, and the bracelet features every single link removable, and that on both sides. There's a Maltese cross motif that runs throughout the watch, the bezel, the logo on the dial. You see it on the crowns. You even see it in the shape of the knurling on the crowns. It's in the link interlock of the bracelet. It's even inside the bracelet. As you can see, the pushers have a little bit of a ridged edge that's very similar to the shape of Vacheron's logo. So the bracelet is beautifully hand finished, and while the third generation bracelet has more features, my opinion is that the second generation bracelet was the most impressively built, combination of solidity and finish that I don't perceive on the current generation of the watch. So you got to be wondering, if this isn't the last watch of today's episode, what on earth could I be holding in reserve for the final dance? Well, this isn't my finale. It's not even the penultimate watch, but it is one of the most important watches of the modern era. Originally launched in 2004 as their first fundamental innovation, this is the Greubel Forsey double tourbillon 30 degree. So you can see that there is one tourbillon inclined at 30 degrees, and that's making 1 minute circuits inside a larger tourbillon, which you can see turning very slowly. And you can see how there is a 4-spoke blued steel serpentine, and each of the 4 sectors here covers 60 seconds. So you have a 1 minute tourbillon inside a 4 minute tourbillon. And the idea being that because the one is inclined at 30 degrees, even sitting stationary on your dresser at night, it is rotating up and down with respect to gravity, the way a pocket watch would in your pocket during the era of Abraham Louis Breguet. So we have this guarantee with the twin axis of rotation and the doubled speed of rotation that this tourbillon will work to cancel out the effects of gravity, and this watch has been awarded at the Concours de Chronométrie, where officially a Greubel Forsey double tourbillon 30 degrees still holds the record for the highest point score achieved. Now, the watch has a manual wind 3-day power reserve. You can see it does have a conventional seconds display. The dial is made of solid gold, and then it's silvered to give it the aesthetic you see here. We have a white gold applique indices and numerals. You can see the Greubel Forsey finish is the best in the world, as the balance bridge, or I should say the bridge for the tourbillon carriage, is entirely rounded and black polished on its top. Every screw is the proverbial 100 Swiss franc screw. Take a look at the carriage for the tourbillon, and on both sides you can see immaculate finish, not just the bridge structure, but also the components of the tourbillon itself. The balance does have a free-sprung architecture with an overcoil hairspring, so there are many, many, many refinements in place to reduce the effect of gravity on timing deviation. Lovely frosted bridges. They use wired brush to frost their bridges at Greubel Forsey. It's a very traditional manual finishing technique. You could see wire brush frosting, anglage a mile wide, satination on the wheels, as well as on the base plate of the movement. You'll appreciate that there's also engine turning and a little golden chaton holding the bottom pivot of the tourbillon. You can see it's fixed by screws. We also have enormous fired blue screws, so we have both black polished and fired blue screws here. Now, the watch is actually fairly wearable at 43.5 millimeters in white gold. You can see it has a little bit of a sine wave on the side to simulate the oscillation of the regulating organ inside. Robert Greubel handles the style. Stephen Forsey generally handles the engineering and the tech. They're a formidable team, and even at their peak, they only make 150 watches a year. When you get a Greubel Forsey, you know two things. One, it is exquisitely crafted with sophisticated engineering, and two, it is going to be rare, and this watch delivers. And you can see, though my wrist is small, this actually isn't huge relative to my hand and my arm. You can absolutely wear this watch on a 16 centimeter circumference wrist, and it is absolutely worth the price of admission. Let's say this watch is going to cost somewhere around $275,000. Well, if you want to get an early FP Journe tourbillon remontoire from his first series of watches. Remember, this was the first Greubel Forsey model. If you want to go buy a tourbillon remontoire, one of the early Journe models, you could pay up to $2 million for those. This is a watch you can buy for under 300 grand. It is technically more impressive, better finished, just as important in the scope of its brand history, and one of the real modern horological innovations that matter, not just on the independent scene, but within the industry as a whole. It is a point of reference, even for the haute horlogerie houses like Vacheron, Lange, and Patek. A very important piece, fairly priced for what it is. This watch is also fairly priced, and it's an unconventional one. In 2001, Omega launched its Museum series. As part of its specialties collection, Omega would each year rebuild and reissue a significant reference from the company Museum, hence Museum series. Now, this is the 1941 Officer's Chronograph watch, and as you can see, it is a double scale with a telemeter for gauging distance and a tachymeter for gauging speed. We have a vintage Omega logo on the dial, on the crown, on the case back. You even find it on the buckle. The watch, 38.1 millimeters in white gold, has double-hinged Vendôme style lugs with a central lug profile. On the reverse side, you can see individually numbered out of 1,941 pieces, the milestone 1941 Officer's Chronograph watch. It features a lovely black lacquered dial, and surprisingly, for a vintage-style watch, it is fearsomely lumed, so it's very practical. It uses an Omega automatic winding caliber 3203, which is a Frederic Piguet 1285, a thicker version of the high horology 1185 that's a bit more robust. Now, the watch has automatic winding, a 55-hour power reserve, column wheel, vertical clutch, free-sprung, chronometer adjustment, coaxial escapement, all of these things. And with the vertical clutch and the column wheel, you're assured of a wonderfully crisp chronograph operation, and then a smooth engagement of the chronograph seconds hand. It is very smooth, and you can leave it running with no hazard to the watch. That is one of the advantages of a vertical clutch system. On my wrist, you can see it wears large for a 38 because the lugs extend so much. They extend about 50 millimeters across the wrist. So you're not going to want to wear this on a wrist much smaller than mine. A wrist of at least 15 centimeters circumference is recommended to wear this limited edition white gold Omega Officer's Chronograph. Finally, the set piece finale, as good as it gets. Launched back in 2019, this is the De Bethune DB28 yellow tones. It looks gold, it's not. It is fired titanium. De Bethune, which has long utilized tempering over heat to blue titanium, has here applied heat for a shorter period of time to uniformly color the grade 5 titanium yellow. That is why the watch is the yellow tones, not the gold tones. Now, this can be reapplied if perchance you scratch it. Because it's not a PVD layer, when the watch goes back to the factory and let's say you scratch it, they can simply refire the case and reapply the oxidation that creates this color. Now, it is a 42.6 millimeter diameter watch that is under 12 millimeters thick, so it's slim. It has variable geometry, spring-loaded floating lugs, a screw-down crown, a manual wind 6-day power reserve, and if you turn it over, you can actually see the mechanism underneath has a power reserve indicator for the 6 days. But more than that, you can see the mechanism that drives it, a complex combination of springs, racks, pinions, wheels, and of course the index itself, beautifully hand-finished with no shortage of haute horlogerie. This was a 2019 launch within the DB28 collection that back in 2011 won the GPHG Aiguille d'Or at the Oscars of watchmaking. The GPHG Aiguille d'Or, or the Golden Needle or Golden Hand, is the best watch of the year. Now, there's a lot going on the dial side. You can see that the oxidation process has been applied to titanium on the watch face as well as the case itself. We have little globes of polished titanium that form the hour track. We have a proprietary balance that's made of blued titanium with white gold masses outboard. It has minimal reaction to temperature, so it's not going to run fast or slow if it should get cold or hot. There's a hairspring that's 2 pieces bent by hand and clamped together to breathe concentrically like an overcoil without the thickness of an overcoil. We have a moon phase that is 1/2 golden, 1/2 white. It has an adjustment interval of once every 1,112 years and twin self-adjusting barrels that give you the 6-day power reserve. You cannot accidentally overwind them. You could see that we have 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs on top of the balance. That's called triple parachute. It's there for 2 reasons. 1, durability to prevent fracturing of the balance staff, but 2, for chronometry to more rapidly recenter the balance staff inside its pivot jewel. And this is important because timekeeping is important at De Bethune. There are plenty of high horology brands that just talk about beauty and craftsmanship and history, but they really don't want you to pay attention to the time your watch is keeping. That's not how Denis Flageolet, the master watchmaker and founding partner of De Bethune, works. He's patented over 8 individual balances because he keeps improving them. Chronometry is everything to him. Now, fine finish is present in abundance. As you can see, Côte de Bethune on the bridge, that the deltoid form bridge that sits on top of the barrels. Those are laid down by a abrasive wheel and they mirror each other from side to side because the wheel is reversed. You can also see black polishing on a cap above the base plate as well as on a cap above the deltoid barrel bridge. You can see that the balance bridge is fully rounded and black polished like the Greubel Forsey. And if we take a look at the edge of the bridges, you can also see that mirrored anglage is alive and well at De Bethune in L'Auberson. The screw heads are black polished. They too are hand finished. And then you can see satination on the wheels, including the barrel caps. All of this beats away at 28,800 vibrations per hour, so they don't use any gimmicks to extend the power reserve to 6 days. It has a modern, high beat rate. Reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details of the watches you see here. We'll take a quick look at the DB28 yellow tones on my wrist. It's an easy fit, and there are several different lug lengths, so you can always ask De Bethune to swap out small, medium, and large. It is tailorable when the watch goes back to the factory. This watch, of course, wears easily on my wrist, and I think with these variable geometry lugs, it would wear well on a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference, and it is rather surprisingly slender. So once again, reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.